When you're involved in a really good synchronicity, it's like finding yourself at the nexus of electrified, meaningful time. Like you are caught in some incredibly unlikely glitch in the matrix designed just for you by some unknowable consciousness. It's so strange, but so undeniable when you're a part of it. It's impossible to write off as mere coincidence, as I'm sure many of you watching know from experience. And I'm talking about something more than just a little bit of a weird coincidence. I'm talking about something more than just seeing 11:11 on the clock. Though I will say that Jung, who coined the term synchronicity, did believe numbers in themselves were significant. He did believe that numbers were archetypal, but I digress. Though if you are an 11:11 aficionado and you want to come at me in the comments, go right ahead. But I bring this up not to be jaded, not to be overly skeptical, but to draw attention to the truly weird, truly multi-layered synchronicities that defy logic, defy all empirical explanation. Take this famous example from the man himself, Carl Jung, for instance. A young woman I was treating had, at a critical moment, a dream in which she was given a golden scarab. While she was telling me this dream, I sat with my back to the closed window. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, like a gentle tapping. I turned around and saw a flying insect knocking against the window pane from the outside. I opened the window and caught the creature in the air as it flew in. It was the nearest analogy to a golden scarab one finds in our latitudes, which, contrary to its usual habits, had evidently felt the urge to get into a dark room at this particular moment. I must admit, nothing like it has ever happened to me before or since. This example is remarkable for a few reasons. One, Jung is with a client, he's having difficulty breaking through with her, and then all of a sudden, this multi-layered synchronicity unfolds. She tells him about this dream that left a mark on her that involved a scarab, which, by the way, is a very mythologically potent symbol from ancient Egypt. And just then, as she's telling him about this potent symbol, a physical scarab appears in the window. The odds of this happening have to be incalculable. And it doesn't stop there. I could give more examples from Jung. I could give personal examples, one in particular that is incredibly multi-layered and mind-blowing and novel. But for one, I've told it ad nauseum on my podcast. And two, I don't want to get stuck in just telling stories. I want to ask some deeper questions. I want to look underneath the surface at a potential explanation of what's going on when it comes to synchronicity. What is pulling the strings to make these incredibly, incalculably unlikely circumstances unfold? And rest assured, you don't have to take it from me, because we're going to be looking at it through the lens of the man who coined the term, the great mythopoetic genius psychiatrist, Carl Jung. He has much more nuanced thoughts than just, well, synchronicities seem to happen. The world seems to be weirder and more interconnected than we can possibly understand. There's much more to it, and it's much more meaningful on a personal level. And I would really argue for our time in general, where we're so disconnected and spiritually and psychologically listless. And speaking of things that are meaningful, I would greatly appreciate it if you took a second to like and subscribe. I know you are berated by YouTube creators constantly asking you to do this, but it truly helps, especially with fledgling media vessels like this one. So first things first, what is a synchronicity? It's a meaningful coincidence where physically unrelated phenomenon line up in just the right way to strike the individual, to make it highly relevant to them personally. Or in Jung's words, he used the term synchronicity to describe circumstances that appear meaningfully related, yet lack a causal connection. And if you really want to do a deep dive on the topic, you can check out Jung's primary material. It's a lengthy essay, Synchronicity and a Causal Principle. So the first thing we have to acknowledge if we want to understand Jung's thoughts on synchronicity and how they are actually related to a much deeper layer of reality, a more unified consciousness, we have to acknowledge that synchronicities are just the tip of a potentially paranormal, parapsychological iceberg. For instance, throughout his life, Jung had some highly impactful precognitive dreams and mystical experiences that led him to suspect there's a much deeper agenda playing out through the human psyche, both on an individual and collective level. This led him to suspect that waking consciousness, ego-based selfhood, is just a sliver of the truth, just a very narrow portion of a much deeper consciousness and reality that we are all connected to. That he really had no choice but to go down this rabbit hole because rational, materialist explanations just fall short. As Jung says in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, nowadays most people identify themselves almost exclusively with their consciousness and imagine that they are only what they know about themselves. Yet anyone with even a smattering of psychology can see how limited this knowledge is. Rationalism and doctrinism are the disease of our time. They pretend to have all the answers. But a great deal will yet be discovered, which our present limited view would have ruled out as possible. Our concepts of space and time have only approximate validity, and there is therefore a wide field for minor and major deviations. In view of all this, I lend an attentive ear to the strange myths of the psyche, and take a careful look at the varied events that come my way, regardless of whether or not they fit with my theoretical postulates. So for this reason, Jung became a voracious reader of myth. He became obsessed with alchemy. He really went down almost every esoteric rabbit hole one can go down. And this is another quote from Memories, Dreams, Reflections that really illustrates why he thought it was important, why he thought it was valuable to do that. Unfortunately, the mythic side of man has given short shrift nowadays. He can no longer create fables. As a result, a great deal escapes him, for it is important and salutary to speak also of incomprehensible things. So to sum it up, this mysterious, ineffable dimension of consciousness that we see at work through phenomena like synchronicity and precognitive dreams will always evade empirical measurement. It will always evade the usual rational avenues. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So we have to develop this mythopoetic fluency that Jung became an expert in. To illustrate the importance of that fluency I was just talking about, Jung goes on to talk about a couple of really highly mythologically and symbolically charged dreams that really altered his personal and spiritual outlook. In one dream, which I had in October 1958, I caught sight from my house of two lens-shaped metallically gleaming discs, which hurtled a narrow arc over the house and down to the lake. They were two UFOs. Then another body came flying directly toward me. It was a perfectly circular lens, like the objective of a telescope. At a distance of 400 or 500 yards, it stood still for a moment, then flew off. Immediately afterward, another came speeding through the air, a lens with a metallic extension which led to a box, a magic lantern. At a distance of 60 or 70 yards, it stood still in the air, pointing straight at me. I awoke with a feeling of astonishment. Still half in the dream, a thought passed through my head. We always think that UFOs are projections of ours. Now, it turns out that we are their projections. I am projected by the magic lantern as C.G. Jung. I was walking along a little road through a hilly landscape. The sun was shining, and I had a wide view in all directions. Then I came to a small wayside chapel. The door was ajar, and I went in. To my surprise, there was no image of the Virgin on the altar, and no crucifix either, but only a wonderful flower arrangement. Then I saw that on the floor in front of the altar facing me sat a yogi in lotus posture, deep in meditation. When I looked at him more closely, I realized that he had my face. I started in profound fright and awoke with the thought, aha, so he is the one who is meditating me. He has a dream, and I am it. I knew that when he awaked, I would no longer be. The aim of both of these dreams is to effect a reversal of the relationship between ego consciousness and the unconscious, and to represent the unconscious as the generator of empirical personality. This reversal suggests that in the opinion of the quote-unquote other side, our unconscious existence is the real one, and our conscious world is a kind of illusion, an apparent reality constructed for a specific purpose, like a dream, which seems a reality as long as we are in it. Had Jung not developed this fluency, those might have just been written off as weird dreams. They might have been totally forgettable. But instead, he suspected they were something far more important, that they were messages from this unconscious dimension of psyche, that mysterious, deeper current that Jung believes we're all connected to, but that most of us never take seriously, or we never really nourish our relationship with it. Now that we're talking about this mysterious connection between the individual psyche and the collective, we need to talk about what Jung called unus mundus. It's a Latin phrase that means one world. I've seen people compare it to the Eastern notion of the Tao, this mysterious unifying force. It's really difficult to talk about, but we can see it at work through phenomena like synchronicity and precognitive dreams, or at least that's what Jung suspected. As Jung put it in a letter, I think you are correct in assuming that synchronicity, though in practice a relatively rare phenomenon, is an all-pervading factor or principle in the universe, i.e. the unus mundus, where there is no incommensurability between so-called matter and so-called psyche. So for us, we don't understand this mysterious connection between synchronicity and what's happening to us physically. We can't understand how this can be possible, but if there is this unknown unifying principle, this unus mundus, it all makes sense. There is an unseen thread, principle that connects everything. Jung elaborates a little more on this in a quote from his collected works. In the final analysis, the idea of unus mundus, one world, is founded on the assumption that the multiplicity of the empirical world rests on an underlying unity. Everything divided and different belongs to one and the same world. So in other words, separation is really just a relative illusion that we human beings carry with us. Or at the very least, we're blind to this unifying principle most of the time, but occasionally we recognize it. Occasionally, it does peek into the world through synchronicity or through a precognitive dream. So synchronicities, as interesting, as buzzwordy as they are just the tip of a much deeper iceberg. An iceberg that leads to a far greater consciousness beyond that of the individual, that leads eventually to this whole unifying principle. And to stretch this iceberg metaphor, the tip of that iceberg and deeper layers of that iceberg do eventually pierce into our everyday consciousness, into our egoic personal realm of reality. And we call those moments synchronicity. We call those moments precognitive dreams. But the bottom line for Jung, or I should say the thing that Jung deeply suspected and really thought was important, is that the individual psyche is just a small growth off of this much deeper dimension of psyche. Our individual egos are just a bud on a branch, on a limb of a tree that's root systems go far deeper than we can possibly understand. And to speculate, I think human beings have sensed this deep psychic root system since time immemorial. They've sensed this unus mundus all along. I mean, look at what our ancient ancestors spent a disproportionate amount of energy doing. Building temples, building megalithic structures. Even as far back as we go, when we find human remains, we often find them buried ritualistically with spiritual items. And this matters because it shows that we've always been connected to something sacred. We've called it many names, but it's always been there. And this might be the only time in history where we aren't, where we've completely lost this mythopoetic fluency that Jung spent so much time developing and trying to resurrect and repopularize. And he did that because he knew that we were psychologically and philosophically and spiritually flailing, that there was a flight from mainstream religion happening, and that left a really deep, important void. A void of meaning that we're trying to fill with money, with empirical knowledge, with dominating nature. And you saw this being a huge concern of Jung's, even back in his time. And I think that very same soul searching, what many people have called the meaning crisis, is just infinitely more inflamed than it was even in Jung's time. But nonetheless, as I just said, he was deeply aware of it, deeply worried about it. And this quote, another one from Memories, Dreams, Reflections, really drives that home. Our age has shifted all emphasis to the here and now, and thus brought about a demonization of man and his world. The phenomenon of dictators and all the misery they have wrought springs from the fact that man has been robbed of transcendence by the short-sightedness of the super-intellectuals. Like them, he has fallen a victim to unconsciousness, but man's task is the exact opposite, to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious. Neither should he persist in his unconsciousness, nor remain identical with the unconscious elements of his being, thus evading his destiny, which is to create more and more consciousness. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. It may even be assumed that just as the unconscious affects us, so the increase in our consciousness affects the unconscious. So synchronicity, precognitive dreams, all of these mystical happenings, they're a call from a deeper realm, the substructure of our minds and reality, and ultimately this unifying principle that Jung called the unus mundus. And maybe reconnecting with these ideas, reconnecting with this unity, trying to develop our mythopoetic fluency as individuals and nourish a spiritual, directly experienced dimension to our own lives, maybe that will help us fill that void, like it clearly did for Jung. It pains me to wrap this up because the Jungian rabbit hole goes so deep, and I would love to proceed further down it with you. Let me know if you would like to continue doing so in future Wonder Dips down in the comments. I am personally a bit obsessed with Jung. I think he's one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century, without question. Don't forget to boop that like and sub. We've got to build clout with the algorithm, unfortunately. Also, I would love to hear about some of your synchronicities or strange happenings or precognitive dreams down in the comments. But that's going to do it for this Wonder Dip. I had a lot of fun with this one. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.